Welcome to Hoosier Homeland, a podcast by the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. This podcast is where we discuss and explore the latest news and insights in the world of emergency management and public safety. Join us as we have engaging conversations with subject matter experts and bring you the latest on how IDHS is working to provide Hoosiers with a safe, secure, and resilient Indiana. Sit back, relax, and let's dive in. On today's episode, we sit down with Regional Administrator for FEMA Region 5, Tom Sivak, to talk about everything emergency management in the region, which includes Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. We discuss how FEMA works with state and local emergency managers, how flooding plays a massive role in the types of disasters that get declared in the state, what the future holds for emergency management, and more. I'm Bridget Campbell, the IDHS Digital Communications Coordinator, and you're listening to Hoosier Homeland. I want to thank you for joining us today, Mr. Sivak. We appreciate you taking the time to share with us some of the important work taking place in FEMA Region 5, which includes Indiana.
Absolutely. Hey, Bridget, great to see you, and it's great to be here. Region 5 covering 6 states and 34 tribal nations, one of which is the state of Indiana, which I have spent a little bit of time in over my years as well.
Yeah, actually, looking back at your time you spent here, I am interested to know, as a former Indiana County Emergency Manager, what did you see as FEMA's role at that time, and how has that changed now that you are in your current role?
Absolutely. So when I was a local emergency manager, I go down my time that I spent with the city of Indianapolis. The way that we saw FEMA engaging was a lot of the time on the preparedness level. And then also in the resilience world or the mitigation world as well, we saw FEMA always supporting. As I looked at building out our plans when I was an emergency manager in Hamilton County, it was understanding where FEMA came in and understanding that when our disaster started local, knowing that we had our partners at the state that were vital to the assisting us in the size, complexity, and scope of an incident. And then and additionally, I remember when I was in Hamilton County, we had a snow event. It was, they always said with FEMA, there's no dough for snow, but we were able to get a declaration coordinating across all of IDHS Region 5 to be able to plan for that event. That's basically that funding that comes back from a reimbursement standpoint.
As someone who has lived and worked in Indiana, what are some of the challenges that are unique to the state? And what are some of the typical types of events that happen here that may ultimately involve FEMA?
When we look at the broad spectrum of things, Indiana is part of the Midwest, and we face a number of disaster risks across, from extreme heat events to cold events, earthquakes, flooding events, tornadoes. These all can be dangerous types of events, and we didn't even talk about potential for human-induced events as well. But these all can be dangerous, and they can cause costly damage to home, businesses, and most importantly, impact our communities as well. When we look at traditional and non-traditional events, when we think about disasters, traditional events to us are probably more of the natural causes. But we also have to be aware that there could be non-traditional events that take place, such as cyber attacks, rail incidents, human-induced events as well. And it's something that we have to be prepared for every single day that could happen in our communities.
Okay, so for our listeners, can you explain a bit how the relationship works between FEMA, state, and local emergency management personnel?
So all disasters start local. And when I was an emergency manager down in the city of Indianapolis and then also in Hamilton County, we knew that every event that starts local ends local. It's the types of events that would involve FEMA are the ones that exceed the capacity at the local level. Then they obviously will contact you over at Indiana Department of Homeland Security for additional assistance. And then there's that next level that if it's exceeded the capacity, sometimes I always said in the emergency management world, there's 3 things you need in a disaster: staff, stuff, and money. When it exceeds the capacities to be able to focus on that event, that's where FEMA will come in. We can be seen as that federal coordinating agency that's charged to support states and local communities to save lives, protect property. One of the things that our administrator says, and I've adopted it in everything that I do, is we are conveners, we're coordinators, and we're problem solvers as emergency managers at every single level. So emergency managers, everyone that's in emergency management field at every day, all of our county emergency managers, local emergency managers, they are conveners, coordinators, and problem solvers every single day. Our states are conveners, problem solvers, and coordinators every single day. And we here at FEMA do the same thing. And we at least are able to engage at every single level with our state, local, and tribal partners as well, especially across FEMA Region 5.
How does FEMA engage and support state and locals so they can be effective conveners, problem solvers, and coordinators?
One of the things that I find now, being at this level, is that FEMA brings subject matter experts to the table. I've said many a times, many emergency managers are generalists. We have to, as an emergency manager, you have to be thinking about what we call these days resilience. What's resilience? It's preparedness, it's mitigation, it's grant funding that's going to be able to build capacity before the disasters happen on blue sky days. And then when the gray sky days happen, being able to leverage those resources to focus on response and recovery. And so, as local emergency managers, you're a generalist. You have to know everything and who to contact when and where, and understanding the size, complexity, and scope of an incident. As we move into the states, what I see with the states is that we have a blended component of journalists and specialists as we bring in our state partners. And the states are the ones that can bring more people to the table, more resources to the table. And now at the federal level, I find that we have a lot of specialists. Anywhere from our regional council to our external affairs team to our mission support team that makes sure that we're supported all the time with blue sky day and gray sky day, situations. Our response team that's focused on when there's a blue sky day, they're focused on operational planning and coming up with consequence management plans, and then focusing on our regional response coordination center, which would be no different than the state emergency operations center or local emergency operations center. Our preparedness team that focuses all on individual and community preparedness, that focuses with our radiological emergency preparedness program and technical hazards branch. And then, we synergize all that around what is it that we're doing every day. Recover. Everybody says recovery. Oh, that's gray sky day, situations. Recovery is blue sky and gray sky day planning as well. But they're all subject matter experts. So one of the things that I can say is that we should be able to answer any question that might be coming into our office to understand where FEMA policy is, in addition to providing subject matter experts that can help be the problem solvers or help convene or coordinate at any level of government as well.
So, with all of these different experts and specialists with all different kinds of subject matter specialties and levels of expertise at all levels of government, from local to federal, what has FEMA been doing to bring everyone to the table? And what benefits do you think can come from these types of meetings?
One of the things we did is we brought FEMA on the road. We came to Indianapolis at the request of Director Thacker, and he said, I want to talk flooding." That was his number one thing. "I want to talk flooding." And one of the things that we used as FEMA is we said, well, let's just be conveners. Let's bring everybody to the table. Director Thacker opened up the doors. We brought our team from the region together and we focused on flooding. We talked about preparing. We talked about response to flooding. The team from Indiana Task Force One was there in the room in the conversation. We talked about what a recovery looks like in flooding and foot stomped the damage assessments that take place. That builds resilience. When we think about all aspects of building resilience, it's being able to bring everyone to the table, talking about what we can do today in preparation for tomorrow. And so when we start thinking about what FEMA can do, it's what is emergency management? What can emergency management do for a community? How we did it in bringing our states together in beautiful Indianapolis, spending a lot of time there myself, I can say that our teams walked away with wind behind the sails, and we knew what the flooding outlook was going to look like for this year. It was the initial outlook. I'm getting a briefing later on what the outlook is going to look like for flooding across the region, and then, of course, it's something that we'll be making sure that we're engaging our states with as well, especially with Indiana.
So, actually, speaking of flooding, it is one of the largest concerns for Indiana in all parts of the state. Is this a bigger issue for Indiana than other states in the region?
Flooding is the number one disaster across the Great Lakes in Region 5 that we see on a regular basis. The administrator said it best. If it rains in your community, it can flood. And so when we start talking about flooding in Indiana, it's flooding in Indiana, it's flooding in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota. It's across our 6 states, but it's farther. Flooding happens everywhere. I saw a picture the other day that showed all the flooding events since 1953 to 2000, I think it was 2020. And in this picture, it showed every single area that had flooded. And this was more riverine flooding. It wasn't overland flooding. And so it's a threat. It's something that we face in our communities across our region and across the nation in any given time.
So, with flooding being such a huge threat, one of the biggest questions I think that are on people's minds is what are the big picture strategies that have been put in place by FEMA to make the region more resilient to flooding damage and displacement?
Flooding is like that's the one thing of like, okay, well, what do we do to prepare for it? Well, what type of flooding event are we preparing for? And so we do see that heavier rainfalls are taking place on a regular clip. I've seen 6, 7, 8, 9 inch rain events that have happened across the region and across the country as I've come into this position on a regular basis. So, what does that mean? When we look at these types of events, how do we know that there's going to be what I say is we know it's going to flood? So it's a predictable surprise. So what do we do to plan for that flood? Well, that's where we need to know where the vulnerabilities are in our community to know how we're going to be able to receive that information, know where to get that information on the river gauges. And then really, most importantly, knowing that we can respond to and recover from that event. The resilience comes into play preparing. The resilience comes into the mitigation factors that go along with it. And so we've seen mitigation programs be effective overall. For Indiana, there's mitigation programs that have been effective. One of the last ones I saw across our region was actually up in Minnesota. We had three major disaster declarations take place in Minnesota last year. It could have been so much worse had we've not been doing mitigation measures from the Great Midwest Flood that affected Indiana too back in the 90s. And so these are things that we should be thinking about over time of how to mitigate those disastrous effects of flooding because it happens on a regular basis. I will also say, though, that in flooding, one of the things that we can do is we need to know where the vulnerabilities are in our community. We need to have good damage assessments. And I know that that's hard because that means that an area has been impacted. But quality damage assessments can help identify if it's going to meet a threshold of a Stafford Act declaration or if it's going to meet the threshold of the state declaration. And I can't foot stomp that enough. As a local emergency manager, it's one of the things that I've said numerous times, especially in my role now. It's I've now learned the lessons. I've seen what damage assessments look like, and I've seen that good quality damage assessments help us get us onto that road to recovery quicker. And knowing, are we going to be requesting a Stafford Act? Is the state going to be asking for additional declarations as it relates to SBA? Anything else like that, the state has options, and we need to be able to filter those options out as quickly as possible to be able to get that community back onto the road to recovery as well.
What do you think are some key pieces of knowledge that residents should understand to best protect themselves from flooding incidents?
So, a couple of things. Number one strategy, I would always say, and I can't foot stomp it enough, flood insurance, right? Flooding is typically not covered by homeowners policy. I want to state that again. Flooding is typically not covered by homeowners policy. When you think about flood insurance, I was told 6 inches of water can basically cause $25,000 of damage in your home. So the most important thing is that right now, what we can do is act now. A policy takes usually about 30 days from application and payment to get into effect. So it can't happen once the flooding starts. And a lot of time and I was kind of a victim of this as well when I said, well, flood insurance is expensive. Once I was informed of what the actual cost of flood insurance was, it was a different story. And so it's educate ourselves, now. In informing ourselves, floodsmart.gov, informing ourselves on what this actually means and identifying what flood insurance can do for you in order to be able to ensure that we can recover as quickly as possible from those stress and stressors.
So, flood insurance is very important, but I'm wondering what, besides flood insurance, can people do right now to prepare for a disaster like flooding?
In preparedness, it does not have to be complicated or costly. So we're big on acronyms in the federal government and across emergency management, but I want to remember SET. It's to me, it's like set the table, set the stage. How do we make sure that we're prepared? And so I want everybody to be thinking about this, the term SET, SET, store. So the number one thing we can think about is where do we store our important documents like our passports, medical records, insurance information, and birth certificates? And how do we make sure it's in a flood safe place so they're not lost? Because that's always one of the challenges that our communities face is when they don't know where the important documents are. The next thing you want to think about is elevate. Elevate items that you want to protect, like your critical utilities or your valuables that you know that could be impacted. And the other thing too is think about outside, but think about tossing things out, toss out. So toss out debris from gutters and drains and avoid accumulation of water. So set, store, elevate, and toss. The other thing too, when we think about it for our communities is what's your emergency communications plan? So when I was in Hamilton County, we one of the things that we did is um, there was a road that flooded and there was an unfortunate event where there was a loss of life on this respective road. So we created the Turnaround Don't Drown campaign for this particular area. Why is that important? Because when you're coming home late at night and there's a flooded area and that you know it's flooding, how do you know to make sure that you can receive that information, and then also ensuring that you're telling your family and your friends uh, how to get the information. Uh, they know where to go, what to do, and how to reconnect after a flooding event. These flooding events that are taking place are rapid. You know what we've seen is they've been. It's one thing of riverine flooding, but it's another thing of the rapid onset of flash flooding. We're seeing right now in California the flash flooding events that are taking place. Those events can happen right in Indiana. They happen across Region 5. And so it's knowing, what to do, where to go, and how to reconnect after that disaster. Let's talk about kits for a second. Build a kit. Make sure that you have enough emergency supplies, water, non perishable foods, first aid, prescription, flashlight, and battery powered radio on hand for you and those that you care about. So I think about it this way: I have my work go bag, I have my home kit. So for me, I'm in the office on a regular basis. I need to know what to do if something happens, especially being here in Chicago, and how I'm going to get home if something were to take place. So think about it: home, car, work, what that kit might look like. Let's talk. We're talking a lot about flooding, but we know tornadoes are something that impact Indiana on a regular basis. So knowing where to go for safe shelter, such as a safe room, a basement, a storm cellar, a small interior room on the lowest level of a sturdy building, to make sure that you can take cover immediately. I'm reminiscing as I'm talking to our partners here in Indiana of the Henryville tornado that took place back in 2012. It's something that I know impacted a community, and I know that it's something that is reminded about around this time every single year. But it's also these tornadoes can happen anywhere at any time. We know that we're prone to it, so we need to prepare for it. And then also the most important thing is how do you get the information? Know how to receive the emergency alerts and warnings. We receive the wireless emergency alerts on a regular basis to most of our phones, but also know where to get that additional information as well. So the NOAA weather radio is always a great thing. Signing up for local alerts in the communities, and most importantly, if as we look at, there's a lot of apps out there. FEMA's app is a great opportunity as well. It's something where you can put your location in, and then if there's going to be an event taking place, that you'll actually be notified of it. You can actually have, I think, up to 5 locations. I have one for here in Chicago, one for my parents over in Ohio. I have one for my sister that's in LA, and then I have one for my brother that's in Mississippi. Why? Because I care. My family is the most important thing for me, so I want to make sure that I know that they're safe as well. The most important thing to do is also there's a lot of preparedness out there for us from FEMA standpoint. Ready.gov is always that landing page for us. And if for anyone that is looking for additional information, it's also our Spanish site as well as listo.gov as well, and of course that FEMA app. It's one of my favorite things that I saw as we taught we that we implemented last year. It's definitely been something that I've leveraged a few times. It's on both my phones, so my work phone and my personal phone as well.
So, taking a second to look ahead, what does the future hold for emergency management in flood prone areas of the state and across the region? What more needs to be done?
So there's a couple ways to look at it, right? The first thing is what's the future hold? We know that disasters have no boundaries. As we talked about resilience earlier, about shocks and stressors, any type of event that we are not planning for is going to be a stressor in our communities. One of the things that we can do now is just know what the risks are in our community. And what are we going to do to be able to buy down that risk in our communities? And so we have to be thinking about that today. Hazard mitigation plans. I know that that was so vital when I was in Indianapolis and Hamilton County. Those hazard mitigation plans can be anything that someone can think about in terms of projects, self-ready projects. I talked about all the time when I was in Indiana. I took that when I came to the city of Chicago about what is it that we do to have shelf-ready projects that are focused on hazard mitigation and reducing that risk in that community. The other thing too is in hazard mitigation, it's thinking outside the box. We have natural events that take place on a regular basis. We have technological events, hazardous material events that take place on a regular basis, unfortunately. And then we also have human induced events as well that take place. And so we have to be prepared for it. So, what's our mitigation plans? How do we make sure that we're building that preparedness? How are we mitigating those effects of a disaster? Those can all be nested in buying down that risks. I always said, what are the absolutes in emergency management? What's the future hold? We know that we need emergency operations plans. We know that hazard mitigation plans buy down that risk. We know it's vitally important to have continuity of operations plans, continuity of government plans. And so when you start nesting this all together, those are absolutes in emergency management. But we have to continue to assess our plans. Who does what, when, and where? How do we make sure that we know who to call and who to convene and who to coordinate with? That falls in that whole preparedness cycle, that planning cycle, the training cycle, the exercise cycle, knowing what to do after that event takes place, and knowing that that plan is a guide to get you there is so vitally important. So we have to make sure that there's always going to be back to basics. The other thing too, that what the future holds is, we really need to be thinking about, the conversation about building codes. I was in a conversation just the other day about building codes. Building codes can help communities recover quicker. It builds resilience back into a community. So we're going to see building codes continue to take form over time. The other thing too is when we think about it, emergency management is now becoming a 24/7, 365 job. We need to ensure that we first are focusing on our communities and knowing where the risks are in our communities. A lot of that is through our strategic plan right now, equity. Equity is those that are disproportionately impacted by disasters. It's not, it's in rural areas, it's in urban areas, it's in suburban areas. There's equity that needs to be bled into everything that we do. The other thing too that we look at is how do we understand the effects of climate change today? And the reason why I say this is because disasters are starting to become larger. They're starting to have more impacts. FEMA is not always going to be at the table to be able to provide those resources. But the next thing that we're going to have to do is we are going to have to think about these disasters being something that's impacting our communities every single day. They're high highs, low lows, larger snow events. We saw that in 2022 where the snow events were impacting Northwest Indiana. Flooding events. The time for now is to prepare for flooding, severe storms, because we know that they're going to happen. I talk to the team here at the region all the time about predictable surprises. We know that these events are happening. So what do we do as the field of emergency management? Not just FEMA, not IDHS, not local emergency management. What do we do as a field to prepare today in preparation for tomorrow? And so, we're going to see events that are taking place. The resilience of the community is going to hinge on truthfully that ability to respond to and recover from that event. And we do know communities are resilient. Any event that takes place now are opportunities to train. And we saw that in the events that took place across our nation any given day. If they're happening, they can happen within our communities, and we need to be prepared. One of the other things I'll say about the future of emergency management is that the community is so strong. Emergency managers across the nation are a strong knit community that are focused on helping people before, during, and after disasters. And whenever I talk to an emergency manager, we are all really focused on that same mission. And if we have that same mission set in mind, the focus on the community and making sure that they're prepared for and that they're able to respond to and recover from an event is so vitally important. And as we continue to create the emergency management community continues to be strong, we'll be able to focus on the communities as well.
So often, a lot of communities and everyday citizens' first time coming into contact with FEMA is while experiencing or working with the agency on a disaster event. As someone who has been on all sides of the spectrum, from local to federal, are there certain aspects of FEMA that people might be surprised to know or you hope people know before disaster strikes?
Yeah. So when I first walked in the door, the number one thing I said was I want to learn everything about FEMA. As an emergency manager, you want to learn more and you want to gain a better understanding. One of the things that I could say is that our team, I can't thank our team enough because our team is so focused on our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners all the time. But it's the same thing that's happening. It's understanding how to navigate. And one of the things that I found is once we know how to navigate, the team here knows that I always talk about how do you get the yes when the answer is no? Or if the answer is no, what's the reason why and what are some potential courses of action to be able to help better prepare a person or better respond to or recover from an incident as well. Nothing has surprised me. What really enlightens me and what really gives me energy is just seeing our depth of knowledge. I can talk about our GIS team that literally has come up with a GIS hub that focuses on every single event that we have about data driven decision making. I can talk about our data team that talks about how important data is for that informed decision and what good data versus quality data versus bad data can look like. I can look across our entire region and say all of us have focused on COVID-19 for almost 3 years now. And in focus, we've all been impacted by COVID-19. And then we've had other disasters that take place and how flexible everyone is and how nimble we become to focus on the situation at hand to be able to serve our communities is so vitally important. So nothing has surprised me. It's more enlightened me and gives me energy. We're focusing on extreme heat right now. And we've formed a collaborative planning team. It started off with 7 people. I'm now at 20 people on a collaborative planning team. That investment on something, and it's across all of our sections that are all engaged on this important topic. That's what gives me the energy. That's what gets me up every morning is I wake up and I'm excited to see what we're going to be focused on for the day and how we're building capacity at our state, local, and tribal and territorial level.
I want to thank you for taking the time to visit with us today. Is there anything else you would like to add or share with our audience of Hoosiers across Indiana?
I can say, being someone who has lived, my family started in Indiana. My 2 children were born in Carmel, Indiana. So I can say that with everything is that I know that Hoosiers focus on community every single day. There's such a pride with our communities throughout Indiana, and I can say that I am so grateful that we have emergency managers, we have public safety, we have communities that are so focused on on building resilience and that are focused on recovering from any incident that takes place. That we are all here together. We're in this together. We are all focused on the same mission, and I cannot thank everyone enough for what Hoosiers do to be prepared for, to be able to respond to and recover from events every single day. And it's such an honor to be chatting with our team at IDHS. And Bridget, I thank you for the time today. And and for us, one most important thing we can do is planning on blue sky days in preparation for the gray sky days is what's going to be able to better prepare all of us for events to come.
Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Bridget.
Thank you for listening to Hoosier Homeland. This podcast has been a production of the Indiana Department of Homeland Security. For more information on FEMA Region 5 and the work they are doing, you can go follow them on Twitter at FEMA Region 5. If you enjoyed this podcast, one you should check out is FEMA's before, during, and after. Common topics include where emergency management is headed, conversations about preparing for the threats of tomorrow, and how everyone has a role in keeping communities safe from disaster. Learn more at FEMA.gov. Are you interested in learning about flood insurance? The National Flooding Insurance Program is a federal program designed to reduce the impacts of flooding by providing affordable flood insurance policies to property owners, renters, and businesses all around the United States. If you would like to learn more about your flood risks and if the NFIP is right for you, go to in.gov/flood insurance. Do you have a story suggestion or topic that you would like to hear on the podcast? We are looking for engaging and interesting content to feature on Hoosier Homeland. To submit your idea, simply send us an email at pio@dhs.in.gov. The subject line, podcast submission. Make sure you include your name and contact information. Who knows, your story might just make it into a future episode. We can't wait to hear from you. For more information, go to in.gov/DHS. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find our full catalog on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube, and Pandora. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Indiana DHS and on Twitter at DHS. See you in the next episode.